Welcome back to episode 330 of the Tall Boy Radio podcast. And as we always say, who knows where it goes when the beer flows? Well, we're doing another episode in our Thin Blue Line series tonight, and that's courtesy of another guest by Vic Ferrari. So, Vic, if you're listening, thank you very much. We really appreciate it. Now, before we say hello to our guest, just want to say hello to the new countries that have tuned in. Last week, we did something unprecedented. We had nearly 100 countries tuning in, and we managed to share 6 new countries that jumped on board that week. This week, it's 7. It continues. I don't understand it, but I love it. So thank you very much. Thank you to everybody in Venezuela, Georgia, Palestine, Bolivia, Gabon, Syria, and Algeria who's listening to the podcast, and anywhere else in the world. That's 102 countries. It's incredible for a small podcast out of a little county in Cheshire. So we really appreciate it. So without further ado, let me introduce you to our guest, Thomas Carchidi. Do you want to say hello and tell us a little bit about yourself?
Well, first off, thanks so much for having me on. I really appreciate it. I'm looking forward to having a interesting conversation. Just hello everybody, and hope you're having a great weekend.
Indeed, yeah, and I hope you're having a great weekend from me too. So, for those of you who don't know, Thomas is the author of a book called Life in Law Enforcement: The Good, the Bad, and the Corrupt. Now, here in the UK, you know, we're very familiar with New York and Los Angeles, and we've had a couple of police officers on sharing stories from there. But a couple of years ago, you know, there was a few tales went live from a place called Baltimore in Maryland, and I apologize if I'm pronouncing Maryland wrong because I know you guys have a unique way of speaking over there. But, you know, and we became aware that actually there's a lot of challenges facing law enforcement out there. So, Thomas, you spent a good part of your career in Baltimore, didn't you? Do you want to tell us a little bit about, first of all, how you got into the police force, what attracted you, and just what it was like being in Baltimore?
So, just a couple things real quick, just so your listeners, watchers don't think I'm insane. I got my guy Santa here. We were talking about him off off the camera before. I keep him up all year round. It's like a family tradition. So he says hello.
Yeah.
Second thing, I'm a New York guy that transplanted to Baltimore, and I came back home after I retired. Came back home to New York, so I don't say Baltimore the right way. I'm a New York guy through and through. My mom and dad are off the boat from Italy. I'm a Brooklyn guy. I was born in Brooklyn, moved to Long Island. I have, you know, an Italian American / Brooklyn, Long Island accent. I don't say Baltimore. You know, they say it a certain way. They pronounce the D. They say D instead of the T, and I don't even say it correct. So after all these years, I don't know how to say it properly. But yeah, so to talk about Baltimore, I was just talking to a friend of mine the other day. Wonderful woman, Molly. She's probably now. I think I have to ask her to think about it. She has to have 35 years or more, maybe even more, 40 years. I'm not sure in the Baltimore City Police Department. And I met her when I first started working there, right after the academy. And we still speak to this day. She's such a lovely woman. You know, she helped bring me up, so to speak, in law enforcement. She was one of my first beat sector partners, you know, and she showed me the ropes. And we helped each other a lot because, you know, I was big and strong and aggressive, but she knew the job. She understood the job, and she understood how to deal with people a little more because she was experienced. She probably had 10 years on at the time when I came on. So we were talking the other day, and it's funny because, you know, you still talk to people after all these years, and you reminisce about stories. And where I'm going with this is, it doesn't matter if you have 40 years on the job in a place like Baltimore. You know, it doesn't matter if you have 40 weeks, 40 days on the job in Baltimore. If you're a sworn law enforcement officer, a sworn police officer in Baltimore, the odds are you're going to have a crazy story, if not crazy plural stories. Um, like I said, it's just it's a unique place. It's a different place. You know, I talk about it a lot. I live in Long Island. I live in New York, and there's $1 million houses in every corner. You know, literally, the average home in Nassau County is close to $900,000, and that's a fixer-upper. You know, um, so you take that and you compare that to what I saw in Baltimore, or some places like, I talk about growing up in East New York, in the Bronx, New York, Manhattan in the 70s and 80s, Chicago, places in Chicago, Detroit, St. Louis, places like this. It's a different world, and a lot of people don't even know that they exist in the United States. And it's even for a guy like me. I was a New York guy, like I said. I seen a lot even before I got into law enforcement, but Baltimore was an eye opener. So like I said a couple minutes earlier, it doesn't matter whether you have a year in Baltimore or 40 years in Baltimore. You're gonna have stories. You're gonna have things to remember, good and bad.
Oh, no doubt. Yeah, no doubt. And that's the one thing that we've learned when we've spoken to the different police officers, most of which are New York City police officers that we've had on the podcast. But they always share the stories. Some of them are funny, some of them where they find a little bit of dark humor in the sad things that they have to interact with on a daily basis. So what was it then that first attracted you to be a police officer, and how did you end up being a police officer then in Baltimore, being a New Yorker?
So I always had like an attraction, so to speak, to there was so many things I loved as a kid. I had so much enthusiasm for life, and I pretty much had a good heart, and you see things differently when you're a kid. You see it more in black and white, more concrete rather than obscure and shades of gray, right? So for me, it was always good and it was always bad. And I got to be honest, I grew up I was born in Bensonhurst, New York in the 70s, and moved out to Long Island, and I seen the good and the bad. I grew up around Italian Americans in the heyday of organized crime in that area. Um, and what you see in the movies is a lot of people say, "Oh, the movies," sometimes it's a lot. Most of the time, it's BS. It's too much. Sometimes it's downplayed, and I grew up around that element, and I also grew up around law-abiding, wonderful people, and that's what my parents wanted me to be. They wanted me to be stand up and upstanding, and righteous and straight arrow. And I promised them that's the way I was going to be, and that's how I lived my life. So I had kind of a mixed upbringing, but to answer your question, how I wound up getting to Baltimore, I just finished college. I finished graduate school, and I was waiting to get on, trying to get on the police department back home in Long Island. And it's not to get into the whole thing, but it's super difficult. You have to either score amazing on this exam that doesn't really test your intelligence to begin with, but you have to either do amazing on this exam, or you have to really have serious pull to get you to the next level. Um, so it's difficult to get the job where I lived. I had student loans, college loans to pay back, graduate school, and one day my dad was reading the paper, and he's like, I know it's a crazy place, but why don't you try? You apply for Baltimore, And I was like, it's funny, Dad, because I already reached out to a couple of recruiters there, and they had something at the time. I don't know if they still do it, but back then they had like a 3-day processing. You go down on a Friday, Saturday, Sunday, you complete everything. Psychological background. You do the paperwork as much as you can while you're there, and you finish. They send you home with a big packet. You finish the rest when you're at home. You take the physical, the polygraph. You do everything in the weekend, so you don't have to keep going back and forth for out-of-state people. And before I knew it, in like 2 months, my background cleared. They saw, I was never arrested. I didn't have a criminal record. I wasn't in a psych ward. Not that there's anything wrong with that. I'm just saying that's what they're
Yeah.
looking for. So to speak, I had a clean record. I had college, graduate school, and they were desperate for people. Baltimore's every year it's 1 through 5 big cities, most violent, deadly cities. At least when I was there. So they were desperate. Within 2 months, they did my whole background. They investigated me, and I remember coming home one day after work and having a voicemail on my phone from the recruiter. I never forget her, Detective Fleet. I think it was Karen Fleet, good woman. Um, she said, "Listen, Tom, everything cleared, everything, you passed the background, you're good to go. You could start what they called pre-hire. You start at like an administrative job and you wait until the academy starts." And next thing I knew, I got an apartment. I went down there, I got an apartment. I was sleeping on the floor. I had nothing. I was sleeping on a blanket. And I started my journey.
Wow. I mean, that tells a little bit about the place of Baltimore, doesn't it? That's how they go about recruiting it. Now, I listened to you when you were on the Vic Ferrari podcast, and interesting enough, like I say, Vic's been good enough to guest on our podcast a number of times, and he always tells us how like he was one of 350,000 New York City police officers or something like that. Absolutely incredible, number of officers to serve that huge city. Very different in Baltimore, isn't it? There's much, much less officers on the ground.
Yes. So think about it. New York City is massive. It wasn't set up that way back in the day. It used to be different boroughs, different areas. Then they conglomerated. Everything came together. You got Brooklyn, Queens, Manhattan, the Bronx, Staten Island. Then you have Long Island right next to it. It's all actually Brooklyn and Queens and Long Island are all on Long Island, Nassau and Suffolk. So you have a huge amount of people. One of the most populated places in America, one of the most populated places in the world. And you have to have a police force that accommodates that need. So you literally have, depends on the year, the decade, the political structure, but back in the day, you had anywhere between 35 and 40,000 police officers. That's like a small army. That's an army, really. In numbers, I'm talking about.
Yeah.
And so that's obviously the biggest police department in the world. I'm sorry, but maybe in the world, in America for sure. I think LA is like the second, which isn't even close. I don't know if it's like 11,000 or I don't know the exact numbers, but I don't think it's even 20,000. And then you have the smaller departments, but it's still big. Like Baltimore, I think is still a top 10 or a top 13 size department. I think we have, I don't know, still today. When I was there, there was 3,500. So what is that? 1/10 of what NYPD is? But you got to remember the population of New York City. What are we talking? 10, 9, 10, 12 million people. Baltimore's 500,000.
Okay.
So it's a different animal. What I will tell you is per capita, per population, per person. Not talking about in the 70s and 80s, with crack, prostitution, Times Square. New York was out of control. New York was out of control with crime. My cousin tells me stories of the 80s when he worked in the Bronx. His precinct in the Bronx was like, I think less than 1 square mile or something like that. And they had like 80 or 90 homicides just in that 1 square mile. Like, think about walking around the block a couple times. Like, that's a square mile, right? So all these people are getting killed just in that precinct. That's kind of how Baltimore was when I was there. So now imagine you have 35,000, 40,000 cops in NYPD. Now you only got 3,500 cops in Baltimore. Now, how many of those cops in Baltimore are detectives? They're not on the street. How many of them are hurt? How many of them are on desk duty? How many of them are working at evidence control or fugitive recovery? So how many patrol officers do you actually have on a nightly basis? Not many, right?
Yeah.
Who's on vacation? Who's sick? So now, if you think about it, you come into work. If you have 300 or 400 homicides a year in Baltimore, that's that many more homicides that the beat officer has to handle.
Yeah.
So in other words, a Baltimore City police officer is really handling their share of calls. And not just, oh, someone stole my wallet. And not that that's not important, that's majorly important, but I'm talking about index crimes. I'm talking about felony murder. I'm talking about serious, serious things, crimes that the police officer is handling every single night. And, sometimes you go to work, you're backed up 20 calls before you even start the shift. And you're holding violent calls, you're holding, crazy stabbing calls. And next thing you know, the night goes by and, you had 30 calls for service. So it was, when they say the Wild West, it was a wild, wild place. It was really a wild place, man.
No, and that's my perception of it. When you look at it and you hear the stories that came out of there, the Wild West is exactly what came to mind. Literally, where you're battling, good against evil. Like you say, street crimes and robberies and burglaries and what have you. You're not dismissive of that. It's not life or death, but you're facing life or death situations, on a regular basis. I can't, in terms of, we spoke a little bit about my job. I have a desk job. You know what I mean? And if I get my 10,000 steps in a day, I'm happy. For you guys to be, down in the beat, it must be incredibly, incredibly challenging. I get that. So in terms of that, then, so how do you prioritize? Then how do you prioritize? You're coming on. What did your average day look like?
So in Baltimore, I'm not talking about other law enforcement agencies I worked at. In Baltimore, let me start with this. I was a young kid. I was aggressive. I saw things a certain way. It took me a little time, not too long, but it took me some time to realize pretty quickly that it wasn't exactly how I saw it. Um, I was a go-getter. I was a numbers guy. I loved going out. I loved proactive policing, not just reactive. I didn't just answer the radio. I loved being out there. I loved making arrests. One shift I remember, I, I think I had like 54 arrestable offenses in a 28-day period, which includes criminal citations. It includes felony and misdemeanor arrests. I forget the exact number, but it was a ton. I had a lot. And that's how I was. I was a go-getter. So every night I would go to work, right off the jump, 10:39 roll call. The midnight shift, we'd start really at 11, but we had 10:39 roll call, I believe it was. Right out the gate, you were either answering calls. If I was lucky enough not to get calls in between, I try to get a couple numbers like citations, open container, nonsense. Something that back then, I don't think so much today. That's a whole nother conversation. It was stat-driven policing, and that's kind of all out the door because of everything that's going on with public perception and everything, stop and frisk. But it was stat-driven policing. So every night I would go and get a couple citations at least. I wasn't a big traffic guy. I wasn't really into that unless I thought it was going to progress into something criminal. Uh, but yeah, either out the door trying to get a couple criminal summonses or keep my eyes out and trying to pick up a couple arrests. And it was difficult. I remember sometimes on a midnight shift, I'd go out early and I'd pick up an early arrest. Take me 3 or 4 hours. I'd do it quick. If the jail wasn't, if central booking wasn't packed, I'd finish quick, and then I'd be back out in the street. And then if I was, I don't want to say lucky enough, but if I saw something else, I'd pick up a second arrest in the night, and I'd process that. So sometimes I'd have two arrests, I think, if I remember correctly. But the problem with that was that got old quick, and every morning you had to start going to court. So you're working your tail off all night. Then every morning you're going to court. Then you had to be back to work the next day. And it was like most of these cases in Baltimore, they called it PBJ, plea before judgment, null pros. They were throwing these things out anyway because the crime rate was so crazy. So yeah, I was making a little overtime, which was nice, but you have no quality of life like that, you know? You're always working, 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 working. Then I had a second job I'd have to go to because I was making nothing back then. I was making $36,000. I was the head of security during the day. In the afternoon. So I'd go right from the night shift. I'd go to court in the morning. Then I'd try to sleep an hour or two. I'd go to my second job. Then I'd go back to work at night. So it was tough, you know. It was tough.
I don't think tough quite covers it there, to be honest. That just sounds incredible. The pressures that you're putting on yourself.
Yeah.
It's no wonder that guys decide to retire after 20 years is a long time. Doing that. I'm sure it wasn't all quite like that. And I have to say, just by the way, PBJ means something entirely different to me. Peanut butter and jelly. But just out of interest, some of the cases that you dealt with, when you're dealing with so many on a daily basis, what I don't know, do they blur into each other, or are the cases that you remember that you look back on that time, that you really never ever forget?
You never forget. You never forget. And everybody has a different takeaway and a different experience, and it affects everybody differently. Um, I was never really affected, so to speak. I didn't think by the job. Um, I'm sorry if you hear my dog barking. It's my rescue pit bull. She's upstairs.
That's
Um,
fine. I'm sure mine will chime in if it gets louder.
yeah, yeah. At the time, the job didn't really affect me, but as you get older, you realize that you don't think things affected you, but then you realize certain things do affect you. And as you get older, you look at them differently and you feel differently about it. And your body's not the same, right? Your mind's not the same. You don't think the same, and your outlook changes sometimes. Not total change, but certain things, the way you see things change, and you never forget. At least for me, I never forget certain things. Just the smell of the water at the inner harbor on a summer night. Um, just the feeling. I can't explain it. For me, it was positive excitement because I loved it. I was a kid. I was 20 something. I loved it. But that positive excitement, every night I went to work, I knew something could happen. Something was probably gonna happen. What was gonna happen? The excitement, the anticipation, always on your toes. But for a lot of people, that was too much. That became too much for them. And people don't want to live their life like that. And it's a fine line because as you get older, you're not 25 anymore. You're not looking for the same excitement or experiences. And then as you're working 6 months, as you're working a year, as you're working 3 years, as you're working 5 years in a sworn law enforcement capacity, you know, you remember this shooting and that stabbing and that building blowing up and, you know, which partner got stabbed in the eye and which partner got shot in the leg and which partner retired because she had a nervous breakdown because she was involved in a police involved shooting, and it's like, which partner? I mean, one of my partners got his. When I say partners, it was a friend of mine that I went to the academy with. One of my friends got his foot shot off on a car stop. His foot got blown off. He was forced to retire after 4 years. Another friend of mine almost got his nose sliced right clean off his face, working plain clothes. He retired. He was involved in two shootings in his first 3 or 4 years working as a cop in Baltimore. He got sliced by a drug dealer and he was forced to retire. So you think about all these things and you say to yourself, now that you're 30, now that you're 40, forget about into your 50s. I don't want that same life. Now maybe you have a girlfriend, now maybe you have a fiance, you're married, you have kids. Maybe you're thinking about slowing down, going back to school like I did, going back to law school. You're not in the same place when you're 50 than you are when you're 25. And
Yeah.
I don't think that would fly for me at this age. You know what I mean?
No, I do know what you mean. You know, when I hear these stories, and like you say, I'm in my 50s too. I was born in the 70s, and I hear these stories now, and the stuff that you put yourself through, and the positions you put yourself in. And I know when I was in my 20s, I was a little bit more blasé about things. You don't, you know, these are the things you hear the stories, and do you know what? That's going to happen to somebody else. It isn't going to happen to me. And you know, and I think when I listen to the stories you're telling me there that has happened to your partners, you're very fortunate that it's happened to them and it's not happened to you. You know, to lose a foot, to lose a nose virtually is, you know, and we tell these stories like, you know, like it's from the pages of a book.
Right.
But these are things that people who are now, you know, have retired and are still living through that, still living through the trauma of that. You know, it's a very, very real situation. One of the things we always ask police officers when we get them on this podcast is, you know, how do you cope, you know, with the macabre side of life? It's very dark, and you know, and you guys just seem to, I don't know how you cope with it, but on top of just coping with it as well, there's always that sort of gallows humor which you use to get yourself through, isn't there?
Yes, there is one thing. Uh, that's very that's very profound. What you're saying and what we're going to get into. Uh, I kind of spoke about this before, I think, on another interview. To make a long story short, there was one time where a woman was super depressed and she jumped up out of a building and she committed suicide. She killed herself, and literally, literally, she. I don't know if I can talk about it on the show.
Yeah,
She
it's absolutely fine.
she exploded, and her silicone, her breast implants came out. At least that's what I thought it was, and it was horrible. You know, if you sit there and you internalize everything you see, and you say that could be my family, that could be my whatever, my cousin, that could be my brother, that could be my mother, God forbid, you can't do it. You're gonna go nuts. So you have to try to push it aside and desensitize yourself. And sometimes you can't, but you have to try and distract yourself. So I remember one of the guys I work with came over and we started, you know, trying to make a couple of jokes and we were giggling. And at the crime scene, and I remember a woman came over and she was like, you know, that's why people don't like cops. What are you laughing at? You know, are you a sick bastard? Are you a sick fuck? She asked me just like that. And I looked at her and I told her, I said, ma'am, you don't get it. If we don't try to change the subject, if we don't try to distract ourselves, if we're stuck with this person, this deceased person, staring at this body until crime scene comes and clears it, we can go insane. We can go nuts. Like, we're not laughing at her. You don't get it. We're trying to change the thought process. And she totally understood. And she gave me a hug. And she's like, I'm sorry. I get it. And I was like, you don't think my heart goes out to that woman and her family? Like, of course. We're not laughing at her. Like, what kind of sick fuck would laugh at that? And she totally got it. She totally understood. And I can't say for everybody, but I can say for me, that's how it was in my early years. You know, whenever there was a dead body, or you know, a kid got his brains blown out, or a woman shot herself, suicide by gun, someone threw themselves in front of a train, out of a building, whatever the case may be, died of natural causes on a toilet seat in a bathroom. You know, somebody was dead for 3 months in the middle of the summer, and then we walk in and it's like the smell hits you, and it's like you ask about things you'll never forget. You'll never forget the smell of a decomposing, rotting, dead body in the middle of the summer. It's not something 99.99999% of people are gonna be subjected to, but police are, first responders are, military, you know, are, and it's something you'll never forget. And yeah, it's a crazy life. It's a
Yeah.
crazy life.
I mean, I find it mind blowing, literally, in terms of the amount of dead bodies I've seen in my 52 years. I can count on one hand. Truthfully, I can count it on one finger. So I can't quite get my head around how you can deal with that almost on a day-to-day basis. I listened to the Vic Ferrari podcast that you were guested on, and you shared a story about the guy you found on the toilet. And did you want to talk us through that? Because I listened to it and I thought, it's just mind blowing that somebody could just visualize that.
There's really not much to talk about. I'll tell you this. Another officer responded, and, at first you're not sure what it is. So you see crime scene photos, you see the scene, whatever. But there's a woman there. People die, right? They die of natural causes. And she literally died in the bathroom on the toilet. And her body was there for a while. And, it's like, that's life. And these things really do happen. But like I said, 99% of, more than 99%, are never going to see that. They're never going to understand that. And, it doesn't even matter. Like, let's just say, for instance, you're a police officer in rural Kansas or Iowa, Idaho, Alaska, anywhere, upstate New York. You're still going to see death. You're still going to see traffic accidents. You're still going to see crimes, not as much as a big city like Baltimore, but you're still going to see death. You're still going to see DOAs like that, the poor woman in the bathroom. So it's one thing to see somebody dressed up in a suit, at a funeral home. That's bad enough. But I don't know. I can't throw a number out. I never looked up statistics. I don't even know if they have a number for it. But I wonder what the average police officer, the number of deaths that the average police officer sees in a career after 1 year, after 5 years, after 20 years. That's part of their job. When there's death and there's destruction and there's crime and there's trouble, you call the first responders. That's their job. But first responders only make up a minute fraction of Americans, a minute fraction, right? So these first responders are the ones handling all of this, seeing all of this, and it's morbid. And even if you don't realize, even if you don't think it's changing you or it's doing something to you, it's got to be doing something, right? Everything that happens in life, there's an equal or opposite reaction, right? There's always something that comes out of something, in action, right? So whether it's good or bad, it's got to change you somehow. It's got to make you tougher. It's got to make you stronger. But maybe at the same time, it makes you more desensitized. It makes you more depressed, more. Some cops have anxiety. Some cops have OCD. Who knows? Depression. But I think after doing that job, and I'm not even going to give it a time. I'm not going to say after 1 year, after 5 years, after 10 years, after 40 years. I'm going to say after a certain amount of time, undisclosed, I don't know what amount, but after a certain amount of time, after seeing a certain amount of traumatic situations, I think it has to affect you somehow.
100%. 100%. I can't imagine that it wouldn't. And I think there's a recognition nowadays. Maybe, we've had a couple of police officers who date back to the 60s and 70s who share stories. And, nowadays then, or certainly during the time that you served, psych services and what have you, how, was your psychology looked after? Did you get to talk through these experiences that you had with somebody professional?
So that's a whole nother concept. I don't even like to get into
That's fine.
psych service. I will get into it. When I say I don't like to, not that I don't want to talk about it with you, it upsets me.
Yeah.
Psych services in the police department is a bunch of shit. It's a crock of shit. They can't say the word today, stigmatize people unnecessarily, and it's unfair. There's no way you're going to go to combat in the military. There's no way you're going to see certain things in the police department and not be affected. Let's be honest.
Yeah.
If you need to talk about it and you need to be honest, you need to do that. But then the next second, as soon as you do that, they're taking your shield and gun. They're taking your gun and shield. They're putting you on not probation. They're putting you on desk duty, light duty. It's all bullshit. That's not the way you treat people, especially that are serving the public. And I'm not a big fan. I'm not a big fan of the whole psych services, the way they recruit people. It's all bullshit. One guy can, when he was a kid, may have told his school teacher because he was in a bad mood to go screw himself. And literally nothing ever happened with it. He became a college graduate, graduate school degree. He became a police officer after that, hero awards. And he may get turned down from a job because some psychologist somewhere said, oh, he has poor impulse control. He knocked on the door too hard or told a teacher to fuck off. Meanwhile, the next guy is going to get hired because his uncle is the chief of patrol, but he has 2 arrests on his record. He has an FBI arrest file. The way the civil service laws are made, they're made so they can hire whoever they want, whenever they want. So if you have one blemish, one fuck up, one screw up, you're out. If they don't like you.
Yeah.
And then they're on to the next guy. They hire whoever they want. Their father's the chief, or they know this one, or they know that one. Then the next guy has 2 arrests, 2 validated arrests on his record, and he'll get the job because that's the way the laws are written.
Yeah.
They can or they cannot. They may or they may not expel you, get rid of you for those type of violations. So it's a big game. It's all BS. If you have the right person in your corner, it doesn't matter what you do. Look what's going on in this world today. It's a joke. Look at the Epstein file, the Department of Justice, law enforcement, FBI. It's a joke, and it makes me sick to my stomach. So to me, psych services is all bullshit. If somebody needs help, give them help. Help them. Be there for them. They're brethren. You don't force them off. You don't tell them no, they can't have a job. It's BS to me.
No, I know exactly what you're saying. And funnily enough, there where you mentioned sort of the idea of nepotism, we've had a number of officers on, and they talk about it. They talk about it like that's just the norm. That's the norm. That's what's happened. We've had guys on, and they've been passed over. Or we had, I think, Vernon Gebeth, who made a lieutenant commander, and he was sharing a story. Like he got one of his assignments, and he was amazed he got it. He says normally, if you get this kind of assignment, you've got your uncle's in the officer, or someone's doing this, someone's doing that.
Right.
He felt grateful to have that experience without having somebody there having his back for him at that stage.
Right.
Which, and people talk about it like it's the norm, whether that's right or whether it's wrong. Now, one thing I wanted to talk about with your good self as well is because to survive like you do, and I do genuinely call it survival. You know what I mean? In terms of dealing with the things you do and processing on a daily basis, I think there needs to be there needs to be something about the character. Now you are you're a martial artist, and one thing we know about martial arts, it's called a discipline because you have to be very, very disciplined to do it. Do you think that helps you in your day to day dealing with the police force?
So I'm going to be very, very, very honest about this topic. Martial arts are one of the best things that ever happened to me. It's a gift from God. I loved it ever since I was a little boy. Chuck Norris, Bruce Lee. Obsessed with martial arts, right? I'm a lifelong martial artist since I'm 8 years old. I got into it really, really, really heavy when I was 17, 18. Never stopped, even through my injuries, health conditions. I just love it. I'm an American Combat Karate black belt, Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu black belt. I love handing down the knowledge now to my guys, my friends, my students, guys and girls, family members. But there's a caveat. We can have a week-long conversation just about martial arts, the martial way, the Zen, whatever you want to call it, the way you look at your life and the way you use martial arts. So to try to make this quick, 2 things. as far as martial arts that relate to me. I've learned self-control from martial arts. I don't have to prove anything. I don't have to show anybody anything. I know what I've been doing it forever. I know people that know me know what I'm about.
Yeah.
Look, a real fighter, you know what somebody's about, you know. But on the same token, you're training all those years and you're learning a certain discipline. And you're literally like Yoda from Star Wars, right? Like you're learning things that other people don't. And let's be honest, you can a pro boxer, a jiu-jitsu black belt, a kickboxer, an MMA fighter, they're very, 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 very dangerous people. If they choose to be, they can be very, very dangerous with their hands, lethal. So it's a fine mix. It really is, because I always try to live like a Christian and stay calm and do the right thing. But I know if I have to get into a fight with a street guy, not a trained fighter, not a UFC guy, not an MMA guy, the odds are something very, very bad is going to happen to them. Very bad. And it's not talk, it's not hyperbole, it's not fake. This is what you do. You train all day. You know, you train for 30 years doing something, whether it's being a doctor or a lawyer or a mechanic or an engineer or a fighter. You're going to have certain skills, like a Navy SEAL, right? They have certain skills. A jiu-jitsu black belt is going to have certain skills. That's a fact. It's not hyperbole. It's not if. It's a fact. If you grapple with or fight with a jiu-jitsu black belt and you're just some guy running your mouth, something bad is going to happen, right? If you run into a cobra and it bites you, something bad is going to happen. So I'm not saying I can beat everybody. I can. There's always someone bigger, tougher, stronger, younger. But I'm going to leave it at this. I'm very capable and competent. And that's not a side I ever want to show,
No.
but I've had to plenty of times. And let's just say I'm still alive. I'm still here.
Oh, listen. I don't doubt it. You know, I have no skills in martial arts myself, but I have the ultimate respect for people who can. You know, for people who have the dedication to do
Right.
that. You know, have the discipline to do that. Like you say there, there's an absolute understanding.
Yeah.
If you're going to get into a tangle with somebody who's with those level of skills, you better be able to help, you know, to take care of yourself, because if not, you are in a world of trouble. I know that much myself.
100%. And not only that, I'm going to take it a step further. You better not only be able to take care of yourself. And in law school, we use a word called reasonableness, the reasonable man, the reasonable thought, the reasonable belief. I'm not talking about take care of yourself in a reasonable fashion. If you if you're walking down the street and someone tells you that's Mike Tyson, and you say, I'm gonna go fuck with Mike Tyson, I'm gonna go pick on him and I'm gonna go have a fist fight. Don't tell me that you're a reasonable average street fighter. Don't tell me that, because you're gonna end up in the ICU or you're gonna end up dead.
Yeah.
If someone tells you they're a mixed martial artist, they're a Thai boxer, a kickboxer, oh, that guy's a legitimate Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu black belt. Don't tell me, oh, I have reasonable skills and I've had a couple fights. You're gonna end up choked unconscious on the street, dead. 99.999% of the time. And that's what it is. You know, you can't, if you go to medical school, if you go to law school, if you become a doctor or a lawyer, I'm in law school. I know things that people don't know. I studied nonstop. I understand the law better than people. So it's night and day. You know, you have the layman on the street, even the tough guy in the street. Then you have real trained martial artists. Then you have professional mixed martial artists that compete for a living. There's different levels to the game. You see what I'm saying?
Oh, I know. Yeah, I know exactly what you're saying. So was there a time when you ever had to employ those skills, when you were a police officer?
Oh, so many times.
Really?
I always, in one way or another, I always used my martial arts, whether it was just in a tactical stance, whether it was in my demeanor, the way I diffuse the situation, or sometimes even just a look, an aggressive look, looking at someone's eyes. The eyes are the key to the soul, I believe. Unless you're a sociopath, unless you're a serial killer, you're not gonna get over on somebody. You're not gonna get over on me. I can tell your thoughts by looking at you, by looking at your body language. Everything I projected, I related to martial arts because I always tried to de-escalate rather than escalate. I always wanted to de-escalate. There's no there's no upside to going hands-on in the street, or choking someone out. There's no upside, especially today. There's no upside. So everything I did, I kind of related to my training.
It's impressive. It's interesting you say, though, about that, looking into people's eyes and understanding them. So my cousin Bo, he's a police officer in San Antonio. He's, works for Veteran Affairs. And literally he describes his job as reading people.
Yeah, yeah,
His job is, he describes it is to understand people, understand what motivates them, understand what makes them tick. And as soon as, you get a grasp of that, and I tell you this, what I mean? He read my kids really well. You know what I mean? We stayed with him in Texas a couple of years back one summer, and yeah, he pretty much had he had them down. He knew exactly what
yeah.
motivated, or which one was the one that's going to cause me problems in life. Probably
That's
both, if I'm
funny.
honest. Yeah, but no, true story, true story. So you mentioned there then as well. So I mean, if being a police officer wasn't enough, you're studying at the moment. Then you're studying the law. Do you want to tell us about that and where that's going to take you?
Yeah. I mean, when I was in college, I always either wanted to go to law school or become a police officer. I became a police officer. I worked in law enforcement. I just didn't have enough time to go to law school. Once I retired, um, I said, you know what? We only live once. Let me give this a shot, give it my best shot, and give it up to God. And that's what I did. So I'm finishing up my fourth year now. I decided to go full-time law school is 3 years, then you study for the bar. Part-time law school is 4 years, then you study for the bar. So I decided to go for 4 years part-time, and I'm finishing up my last year now.
Wow. What's that been like then? What's that been like? How different has that been to the discipline you put into your martial arts and your police training? How different has it been studying for this?
It's different, but it's similar. Um, I enjoy the martial arts. I enjoy some things about the law, but not all of it. Most of it is dry, mundane. Law school is torture. It's brutal. There's a reason why the percentage of so few, the percentage of Americans that graduate from law school and pass the bar exam, I don't know, it's like 0.04 or something, 0.4%. It's so small. It's because it's very difficult tasking, like mental gymnastics. It's a different type of thinking. It's like a foreign language, a lot of the stuff that you learn. And it's like that movie, what the hell was it called? Ferris Bueller's Day Off. Bueller. It's over and over and over. And you have to have serious determination just every day, between classes, studying, assignments, reading, case briefing. You're spending 5, 10 hours a day. And you have to do it for 3, 4 years. And at the highest level, it's not like reading an Archie comic book, a Star Wars movie. You you really have to dissect these cases and understand the law. You have to know the exceptions to the law. You have to know, how to argue both sides. Every time someone goes to court, a defendant, whether it's criminal or civil, there's two attorneys. The reason why there's two attorneys is because there's two sides to the argument. So you have to be able to see both sides, analyze both sides, understand both sides, and argue both sides. So it's very difficult. And I'm glad I did it now, but I don't think I would start over again.
No, interesting. So, I mean, when it might be the way it's portrayed on the silver screen. I don't know, but there's this perception that if you're a police officer, you're fighting good against bad. Like you say, as a kid, black and white, you don't see the greys. You come to understand that in life when you get the greys yourself. I mean, you start to see the differences. But then you're trying to put these bad guys away. But then you get the idea that it gets into the legal system. The legal system gets confused. It gets muddied. Like you say, there's two sides to the story. They're going to, and it's right that they're put in front of a judge to make that decision. But there just seems to be a juxtaposition there. You know what I mean? Is that a fair comparison to say that the cops, they'll put the bad guys away, and then you'll get somebody defending that bad guy and potentially getting somebody off who perhaps doesn't deserve to be free. Is that a true story? Is that a true reflection, or is that just Hollywood playing with our emotions?
So what I'm hearing you say, and I'm trying to understand completely, there's good and there's bad. There's two sides. The cops are good, and then you have the defendants, or the bad side, so to speak, right? The criminals.
Yeah.
No, that's 100% absolutely not even close to reality. And I think I don't think, I know the world knows that now with the advent of 24-hour media, technology, the internet. Humans are humans. We are messed up as a species. We don't even need to get into that. The police do so many great things, and then they do so many crazy messed up things. And I don't care if people like that I'm saying it. It's the truth. I saw what I saw. I know what I know. Society knows what they know. They know what they see. For example, law enforcement might do an amazing task on Monday. They save a person from jumping off a bridge. They walk him off a bridge. They stop him from committing suicide. Great. They get a life-saving award, this, that, the next. Then the next day, you read something in the paper or in a court case about something horrific that police did. So it's always this give and take, back and forth. It's not like I thought when I was a kid, oh, the police stand for everything perfect. Hell no. No. In theory, it is what it is, but theory is not real life. So, in other words, yes, there are criminals that are awful human beings, horrible people, deserve to be behind bars for the rest of their life, deserve to be put to death. But there's also criminals that are unjustly accused of crimes. There are people that, haven't committed the crime they're accused of. So there is a need for, of course, police, but there's also a need for defense attorneys and defense, right? Because sometimes people do things by accident. Sometimes people make mistakes. Sometimes they deserve a second chance. Sometimes they didn't do it at all. So I'm not saying that I'm on the right, all the way to the right with the police. I'm not saying I'm all the way to the left with the criminals. I'm more middle right. I'm with law enforcement, but law enforcement is not always the bright and shining star. They're not always, you know, amazing and upright. And it's not always the criminal that's the bad guy. So it really goes to the totality of the situation. You got to look at every case and every situation, right? You can't always say, okay, this guy was arrested, he's no good. He did this crime. It doesn't always work that way. So that's why I don't know if I could be a defense attorney. I don't know if I could defend somebody that, God forbid, hurt a 2-year-old child. You know what I'm getting at? I don't know. I don't think I could do that. But we do need defense attorneys. We do need advocates for people that are charged with crimes. Correct? I mean, that's the way I see it.
No, 100%. You know, that's the way the justice system works. It's just interesting to hear it from somebody who's experienced it from both sides. And like you say,
Right.
life just isn't that simple. It'd be lovely if it was, but the truth of the matter is it's very, very much more complicated. And you can talk black and white all you like, but the world is grey, and that's the true story of it.
The world is very gray. The world is very gray.
It's full of very, very grey areas. So one of the things I want to talk to you before we let you go is obviously, you know, you're a published author, you know,
Yes.
and it takes a certain amount of discipline to sit down and write a book. Trust me, I know. I've tried it a couple of times, and I'm still got. I will make it happen. I promise. You know, I've talked about the book that I'm writing this podcast a couple of times. You know, I haven't picked up my laptop and done anything with it in about a month or so. So it takes a lot of effort. It takes a lot of discipline to put that book out. So your book, The Good, the Bad, the Corrupt, is interested in life and law enforcement. Tell us a little bit about that. Tell us what inspired you to write it.
So, literally, for a lot of the reasons we spoke about earlier, and feelings I've had inside of me for years, I always felt like like we spoke about, whether you work in law enforcement for a week or you work in law enforcement for 40 years, you have certain ideas and certain perspectives, and you're privileged, so to speak, to seeing and feeling certain things. And you've seen certain things that most others haven't. You've been subjected to certain situations that most haven't. And I always said, in my mind, I thought it was important that people really understand what it's like to serve in a sworn law enforcement capacity, you know, to really serve, and not just to see it on TV, not just to hear about it from someone that really doesn't know, from the horse's mouth, so to speak, from someone that's been there. And I just started writing notes. That's why my book is really a memoir. I just started writing notes one night, and then the next thing you know, I have like 500 pages. And yeah, my book isn't written in like, it's not a famous work like a Lord of the Rings type work, like wonderful written prose, and it's not like that. My book is like I speak, gritty, and it's all 100% true. All 100% true. And it's like a memoir, like a guy talking. It's like me talking to you. And I always, one thing I find super interesting and important, something I always think about, I point out a lot of good and I point out a lot of bad in law enforcement, the things I've seen: corruption, politics, right? Crime, nepotism. But one thing I don't do is I don't name anybody. I didn't grow up that way. I'm not that way. I don't look to get anybody in trouble. I'm not looking to get anybody in the hot seat. And no one is because of me. No one has. But one thing I will say, I have 600. I don't know. I'm making up a number. Go to my index section. Go to the back. You'll see all the pictures, all the documents. You'll see all the newspaper reports, the magazine articles, television shows, movies, books. I have so many cited sources to support my claims that nobody would be in their right mind. No one would be credible to deny what I'm saying. That's why my book it's been out almost 2 years. No one comes back and disputes anything I say because they can't. I have people tell me, oh, that's not a good look for law enforcement. You're a brother in blue. They get a little annoyed at me sometimes. And I say, listen, I'm an honest guy. I'm not here to make you look good. I'm here to make you look good when you are looking good, when you do good. And I'm here to be honest when things aren't good. I'm here to tell the truth, is what I tell them. So we can fix certain things that need to be fixed and keep going with things that are working, right? That's what my book is all about, to tell a real story. So anybody that wants to come and challenge anything I've said, the veracity of what I've said, the truthfulness of what I said, please, we'll come back on this podcast, any podcast you want, any media outlet. Challenge me on anything I've said in my book. I'm not going to give specific names because I'm not like that. I don't do that. But challenge me on anything, any of my sources, anything I've spoken about. It's not going to happen because it's all true, you know? So I think that's why people get annoyed at me sometimes because they say, yo, you are a cop. You shouldn't say some of these things. But I'm respected at the same time, too, for being honest. You see what I'm saying?
Yeah, I know exactly what you're saying. You know, it's important that when you look at a situation, you share a situation, that it's honest. You know, you can't just share the good side of everything, because that just simply isn't true, and
It's not true.
it's not an accurate portrayal of how things were. You know, you have to be honest. You have to look at the
Yeah,
negative
it's
side.
BS.
Yeah, and that's true for life, not just for, not just for the police. So, we normally wrap these things up round about the hour, and I've really, really enjoyed this conversation with you. We started off your time in the police force. We talked about a number of other things, and and I think that one of the things that we've done while we've done it, we've looked at the emotion behind it as well. We looked at the thought processes, and we looked at the discipline, and I found that very, very interesting. And I hope our listeners have too. So one of the things we always ask for our guests when they're on here is to share where they can pick up this book as well, because we'll put a link in our show notes. I will tell you this: if you want to order it in the UK, there's about a 6-week lead time on it, ordering it from Amazon. I don't know, it means it's incredibly popular, or it's because it has to be shipped over here from the States. But tell people where they can find your book. We do have a good listenership in the United States as well, by the way, so they'll be able to pick it up a lot quicker than we can.
So you could just literally go to Amazon, just Google my name, Thomas Carchidi. You can Google A Life in Law Enforcement, The Good, the Bad, the Corrupt. That's the name of my book. A police memoir. Grab it from Amazon. You can go to my website, lifeenforcement.com. You'll see it all over online. Bookbaby.com. That's my self-publishing company. You can get it from them. Yeah, it's real simple. Just go online. I think it's a real interesting read. I think it's eye-opening and entertaining. And I think people that haven't worked in a law enforcement capacity, I think their mouth will drop when they see, what really goes on. Because like I said, whether you have a year on the job or you have 40 years on the job, you're going to have stories.
Yeah.
And that's it, man. That's it.
Amen. And we'll put a link in the show notes to the audio version of the podcast, so you can just click on it and you can find the book on all of those places, and it'll take you straight to the website. So that just leaves it to me to say thank you very much for joining us. I've really, really enjoyed this episode. And if you could say goodbye to our listeners, we'll call it a day.
Hey, again, it was my pleasure. Thanks so much for having me on the show. It was a lot of fun. I love talking, just like two guys shooting the shit, talking. Everybody out there, God bless. Have a great weekend, and pick up the book. I think you'll enjoy it. It's a good read. And watch the podcast. Watch the podcast.
Yeah, also, oh yeah, definitely. I've ordered your book. It's going to be with me in about 2 weeks. I ordered it about 4 weeks ago. So fingers crossed.
Thank you so much.
And Jeff Bezos is good enough to send it out as he promises. So it just leaves it to me then to end this podcast as it started, and by saying, truly blessed is he who keeps a little bit of Christmas in his heart every day.
Hey, yo, there he is.
Awesome. So thank you and good night.
Friends around the mic, kicking back, all right. Day turns into night, podcast in the spotlight. Sipping on that brew, talking